LibertyNation.com does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement. Donald Trump gets indicted again. What does it mean? Find out right here and now. Plus a rundown of a number of challengers to the office of President of the United States, Tucker's big debut on Twitter, and more. All right now on this episode of The Uprising.
We are The Uprising.
Fire up a color teeny and watch the pictures as they fly through the air. Welcome back, Mr. Timothy Elting Donner. This is the Uprising podcast from LibertyNation.com. I'm your host, Scott Cosenza. Tim, it's a jam-packed show today. We've got Trump indictment. First up, some Supreme Court news, some election challengers, and we'll see if we get to it, Tucker's big show debut.
With all due respect, Scott, we covered the Trump indictment like 8 weeks ago.
No, Trump,
wait, that was a different one.
Yeah, this is everybody gets their turn at indicting Donald Trump if you win a prosecutor office in a progressive area.
It's kind of like a whack-a-mole kind of thing.
That's exactly right.
Pops up, yeah.
I've heard it described as pass the baton, which I think is a nice way to think about it. Each prosecutor,
right? Alvin Bragg calls a special prosecutor Jack Smith and says, "Okay, I've done my part. Your turn now. I got him to first base. Now you got to hit a double in the gap and get him to third."
Alvin Bragg gets a turn. Letitia James will have her turn. Yeah. Who knows who else?
Georgia is, I think it's like so many of these other cases where the Georgia case where he supposedly tried to manipulate the vote after the fact with Governor Brian Kemp. Like these other cases, it seems to me that a jury in Georgia, depending on where you derive your jury, doesn't seem like it's a great shot that Trump would be indicted down there, just as it doesn't seem like that great a shot, Scott, that he's going to be found guilty on any of these 7 charges in Florida because, jurisdictions matter, right, as to where a case gets tried. And as you pointed out, they wanted the case in D.C., but apparently this federal case going to be in Florida. Is that correct? And if so, why did it turn out that Florida was the place instead of D.C.?
Florida is where the defendant lives, and Florida is where the case lies in terms of the evidence collected. That's where the search warrant was executed. That's the natural locus, for this case. It would be weird if it was out of New York for Trump stuff, but like either D.C., I think, or Florida would be appropriate.
Right,
and
but
they would have
preferred D.C., right?
Probably, but here's the thing: it's actually benefits. I think that the sort of standard analysis of something like this, you would say it benefits the defendant to have charges lodged where they are because of the convenience for them to actually meet the burdens of defending themselves. It's helpful if you're near the courthouse, literally. And so for that, I would say it's Trump. But more than that, I would say, so in the pages of LibertyNation.com, Tim, the sponsor of today's podcast, Graham Noble wrote this story up for the site, and I think it's appropriate because he's the chief political correspondent and satirist for LibertyNation.com,
which is the two appropriate professions.
Yeah,
to cover this story.
This is a political story, I think, more than a legal story. That's sort of how I process it. But I want to, just before we go any further, let's give a quick listen to what Mr. Donald J. Trump thought about the charges.
They come after me because now we're leading in the polls again by a lot against Biden and against the Republicans by a lot. But we're leading against Biden by a lot, a tremendous amount. And we went up to a level that they figure the way they're going to stop us is by using what's called warfare. And that's what it is. This is warfare for the law. And we can't let it happen. We can't let it happen. Our country is going to hell and they come after Donald Trump, weaponizing the Justice Department, weaponizing the FBI. We can't let this continue to go on because it's ripping our country to shreds. We have such big problems, and this shouldn't be one of them.
All right. That was, he gave like a 4-minute screed. There wasn't a ton of substance in there, but basically the idea was this is all about one thing and one thing only, and that thing is they're trying to get me. Just like Russiagate, just like everything else, that's the same thing here. And he seems to be trying to be poised to benefit from it politically.
Well, it's pretty hard to argue that he won't, because the last time that he was indicted, his numbers shot up in the polls. And so this is sort of a repeat of that. And the added benefit, sort of a corollary to him going up in the polls, is that there's an increasingly divided field with all kinds of people and their brother entering the race as if they have a real shot, which they don't. It only helps Donald Trump to divide the field any further. And these candidates, and I said this before after the Alvin Bragg indictment, that these candidates are in the extremely awkward position. Tim Scott, Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, and all of them.
They've got to come out and defend
They've
Trump.
got to come out and support the guy they're trying to beat in the primary.
Tim, it is a remarkable situation, I think. Donald Trump, before he released his the video that we just saw, that Truth Social Rumble video, he released a 1-minute long campaign commercial, and the name of the campaign commercial is Wolves. Let's go ahead and play it.
Just how far are the radical left and inside the Beltway bandits willing to go to stop him? We all know they hate him for winning the fight to protect life, for exposing their deep state, for draining their precious swamp. And they already know he'll crush Biden. So like a pack of rabid wolves, they attack. So let's impeach him. Let's get tainted radical left prosecutors to charge him. Let's conspire with Hillary and the FBI with fake stories about him. All to distract from Biden's incompetence, weakness, and money-grabbing corruption. But here's the thing. He'll never blink. That's called having the courage of your convictions. And it's why he's our president.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
What do you think of
I'll
that?
tell you what, Scott, that's an impressive, really impressive ad. He's got some remarkable ads running. I did a piece called Ad Wars. Trump eviscerates DeSantis. And he made DeSantis look like a little spoiled brat midget by the time the commercial was over. He is right on point in terms of what he needs to emphasize in his ad campaign. And now he's got more.
Does this indictment put Trump in a better position to win the Republican nomination than he was a week before?
I'd say it's about the same.
About the same. No change.
I think the indictment effect, the indictment bump, so to speak, has mostly already been experienced after the witch hunt of the Alvin Bragg indictment, which everybody, including many on the left, would admit was extremely lame. This one, though, of course, it's a federal indictment on 7 different counts. And I think the one that's, as I understand it as a civilian, you're the ambulance.
Thank you for recognizing my superior position, Tim, vis-a-vis the analysis here.
You're the ambulance. The attorney, obviously, it's a weaponization of the American justice system to a degree I've never seen before. But it seems to me, as a civilian, that the obstruction of justice charge would appear to be the most dangerous for Trump, as one that so frequently meets with success, it seems, at the prosecutorial level.
It's easy to obstruct justice.
Right,
That's the thing.
right.
Yeah,
Exactly. So right. So
right. That's the way the statute is constructed, to be as broad as possible, to give the government the greatest latitude to put people behind bars, or use it as a lever, right, to apply pressure. So when there's a case, ideally, in an ideal sort of system, is there'd be one person who's really bad, and you'd use that lever for some of the lesser bad people to get testimony against the really bad people. Oftentimes in our justice system, it doesn't seem like it's working out that way. But in any case, that's the sort of the best case scenario.
From a political standpoint, I think it just comes down. I could bring it down to like 10 words: the choice facing the American people, which is, do you want, if Trump does win the nomination, do you want, on the one hand, a guy that's too weak, Joe Biden, or do you want a guy that many believe is too strong, Donald Trump? And it, seen through that prism, it doesn't seem like many people are going to be satisfied with the choice. But it's a question of whether the specific use of the government to use almost Stalinist tactics to try and take down their political enemy and the front runner in the race. People have to evaluate that juxtaposed to how corrupt they believe Trump is or isn't. And, it's sort of, choose your corruption. Do you want to choose to believe that Donald Trump is totally corrupt and anything he gets, he deserves? Or do you choose to believe that a government, that the ultimate government corruption is to literally take down, arrest, and imprison your political enemy? That's something that we saw in the Soviet Union, we've seen it in dictatorships all over the world, never before in the U.S.
There's a part of me that thinks these people just don't get that Trump would be worse off if they left him alone. If they never talked about him, never, I get it. Well,
they're afraid to let
benefits
him
on their side. They get clicks and they get money by demonizing Trump. People they write go to their checkbooks and they send them dough and they give them votes and clicks and attention because they've propped up this massive enemy, and then they get to slay their dragon, and then they become heroes for it. But boy, also on the other side, if Trump didn't have them to rely on as enemies, I think on the Republican side, he'd be way worse off. And they could,
Well, but the left is not willing to let Trump stand on his merits or lack thereof. In other words, they're not willing to take the chance that voters could do what they did in 2016.
Well, let's talk about
in 2016, they didn't really see him coming.
Right.
They laughed him off. They minimized him.
Right.
But they said they would never let that happen again. But I think the obvious riverboat gamble for the left on this is, what if Trump does win? If he wins, I think those leftists who promised to leave the country if Trump got elected would be well advised probably to do that immediately upon the election being certified, because, Trump has, think about Trump on 4 years of revenge against all the people that targeted him in an environment, Scott, where now he knows, so to speak, where all the bodies are buried.
Right. And he's not running for re-election. He doesn't care about that.
He doesn't care about that, doesn't care about positioning, and is willing to take on any and all targets, say and do anything to get power back, and then to punish those people who, so they're, either way, Uh, it's honestly, I think the consequences of this are so severe, Scott, that I can hardly process them yet.
I think, yeah. You said a mouthful right there, my friend.
Yeah.
This is history in the making, and it's tough to have some kind of wise detachment or thought about it as it's rolling over us here. There was speaking of challengers, I've got one clip from a challenger for Trump's bid for the nomination for Republican candidate for president, and it's not from the Florida Governor DeSantis, but instead the former governor of my former home state, Tim, New Jersey, the Garden State, and Mr. Christie, who shocked me with his appearance on CNN. Let's go ahead and take a look and a listen and see if you.
And I don't know what President Trump is thinking about this, except that he's been a puppet of Putin from the time he was president. And it always was disturbing to me. We would argue regularly about Vladimir Putin during the time that he was president. And I think it's very clear what we need to do. We need to give the Ukrainians every piece of military hardware they need to protect themselves against this aggression. And I don't know what President Trump is thinking about this.
Tim, he's been a puppet of Putin since the beginning of his presidency. So says Christie. What do you make of that?
I mean, look, Christie is just desperate to be relevant. And he's been irrelevant for probably a decade or so. He had a failed campaign in 2016. He came in 6th in the New Hampshire primary and then dropped out. And he's, you want to see career politician in the dictionary, as they say. His picture would be next to it with Biden on the other side, because, here was Christie who ran against Trump. Then, as soon as Trump got the nomination, he loved Trump. Then he ran Trump's transition as when he was president-elect. And then he expected to be offered attorney general. He wasn't. And so he turned against Trump. And when Christie called Trump a coward several months ago, I think that was a turning point in him deciding that he was going to be what he's been accused of before, in which he was in 2016 regarding Marco Rubio, and it's perfect, coming from New Jersey, a paid assassin.
Watch yourself.
Okay. Well, you're from Pennsylvania in my mind, but be that as it may.
The Delaware Valley. I'm repping the whole valley, Tim.
So Christie is just, he doesn't bring anything to the table except what he's going to do, which is a relentless drumbeat of attacks on Trump after leading his transition team in 2016, 17. I think people can see him for what he is. He's a flip-flopping career politician who was once significant, but he's like Copacabana, the song with the washed-out lady who sits there with faded feathers in her hair getting drunk at the bar because her best days are long behind her. So, look, Christie, let me put it this way, too. Okay, a guy like Tim Scott, you could say, well, he's a nice guy. He's good. He's well-liked. He's pretty effective. He's a significant figure, being a black conservative who's risen this high. But if he can't win the nomination, but he could be a good vice presidential choice to try and increase Trump's support in the black community. Okay, Nikki Haley could help with women, even though she couldn't probably win the nomination. DeSantis is the second most popular figure in the party. He'd be an obvious choice. But Christie, and I will add Mike Pence to this as well, they bring nothing to the table. As Christie said there, Scott, the last thing the current Republican Party wants is a warmonger. And that's what Christie's essentially saying, that we need to, he came up just short, it seemed to me, of saying we ought to just send in our troops to assist.
Oh, that'll be for next month. Yeah, that'll be for the re-election campaign.
Does he realize that the party is not the conservative party of his generation? It's a populist and anti-war party for the most part.
I will take issue
by Trump keeping us out of war.
I will take issue with one thing that you just said in your screed there, and it's not the Barry
I call
Manilow
it
quote.
analysis.
And it's not the Barry Manilow quote, which I treasure and appreciate.
It's
okay,
bold analysis, Scott. Bold analysis.
It's the
get your.
Christie has spent the last 30 years or maybe as a politician, but before that he was a prosecutor.
Right.
Now,
long ago and far
maybe
away.
prosecutor and politician are the same thing. I'm open to that, and maybe I've said that
but
before.
James Comey used to be a prosecutor.
But I'm gonna
too.
no. You're missing the point I'm trying to make, which is just that Tim, he could actually be really valuable for Donald Trump right now, discussing this indictment in a way of defending Trump. In other words, he could actually make himself that relevant person. Not as he's never going to be president of the United States. It's preposterous. He's got no mojo. He could be an attorney general. He could be a judge. He could be a undersecretary of the Interior. In other words, he could do a bunch of things, but he's not applying himself, I think, in the way that
he's
he can benefit.
In a position. Look, to extend your point, he's not going to be on a presidential ticket. I mean, Trump's not going to pick Christie.
No.
I mean, he wouldn't pick him even if Christie was bowing down to him, because you don't need.
Which he will, by the way, at some point in the next year. I'm sure we're going to see that clip, which is Christie saying, some complimentary thing about Donald
exactly.
Trump, right?
Just like Mitt Romney did after the 2016 election, where he came and bowed down and looked like a total hypocrite. But Christie could choose to get in, and while he's not going to be picked for VP, he could position himself possibly as an attorney general or as a senior cabinet level official.
Yeah.
But by coming in with guns a-blazing, like he has, he's put all of he's put his entire campaign into attacking Trump.
And not only that,
it's not going to go anywhere.
And not only that, but attacking him on the weakest possible charge for a Republican audience. In other words, the Russia collusion stuff, that's what this is. This is an attack on Russia collusion. And like you say, tone deaf for a discussion about the war. I was going to reserve it, but boy, I'm just going to play it now, because I think we want to, once again, Tim, an unintentional segue right down the middle to Tucker's new show, which premiered this week on Twitter. I guess he's going to do 10-minute segments, like it's a 10-minute show. Mm-hmm. He's run 2 of them so far, and as of this broadcast recording time, how's that for a double negative at on June the 9th, when we're recording
it's called
in the morning,
protecting your rear end.
It's up to 110 million views.
Remarkable.
And he started the show. This is why I think it really does bear.
This is a seismic event. It really
is a seismic, yes. And when you see what he did with his time, what did he do with his presentation? This is how he leads off.
Hey, it's Tucker Carlson. This morning, it looks like somebody blew up the Kakhovka Dam in southern Ukraine. The rushing wall of water wiped out entire villages, destroyed a critical hydropower plant, and as of tonight, puts the largest nuclear reactor in Europe in danger of melting down. So if this was intentional, it was not a military tactic. It was an act of terrorism. The question is, who did it? Well, let's see. The Kakhovka Dam was effectively Russian. It was built by the Russian government. It currently sits in Russian-controlled territory. The dam's reservoir supplies water to Crimea, which has been, for the last 240 years, home of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. Blowing up the dam may be bad for Ukraine, but it hurts Russia more. And for precisely that reason, the Ukrainian government has considered destroying it. In December, the Washington Post quoted a Ukrainian general saying his men had fired American-made rockets at the dam's floodgate as a test strike. So really, once the facts start coming in, it becomes much less of a mystery what might have happened to the dam. Any fair person would conclude that the Ukrainians probably blew it up, just as you would assume they blew up Nord Stream, the Russian natural gas pipeline, last fall. Mm-hmm. And in fact, the Ukrainians did do that, as we now know. It's not like Vladimir Putin is anxious to wage war on himself. Oh, but that's where you're wrong, Mr. and Mrs. Cable News consumer. Vladimir Putin is exactly that sort of man, the sort of man who'd shoot himself to death in order to annoy you. We know this from the American media, which wasted no time this morning in accusing the Russians of sabotaging their own infrastructure. Bill Kristol, the man who once told us that Saddam Hussein was responsible for 9/11, immediately denounced Putin as a war criminal and even more savagely compared him to Donald Trump. The rest of the pundit class made similar, clearly coordinated noises. Putin did it! Putin did it! And their reasoning was simple. Putin is evil, and evil people do evil things purely for the dark joy of being evil. In this specific case, Putin attacked himself, which is the most evil thing you can do, and therefore perfectly in character for a man that evil. That was their explanation. No one who's paid to cover these things seemed to entertain even the possibility it could have been the Ukrainians who did it. No chance of that. Ukraine, as you may have heard, is led by a man called Zelensky. And we can say for a dead certain fact that he was not involved. He couldn't have been. Zelensky is too decent for terrorism. Now, you see him on television, and it's true you might form a different impression. Sweaty and rat-like, a comedian turned oligarch, a persecutor of Christians, a friend of BlackRock. But don't believe your own eyes. Actually, Mr. Zelensky is a very good man. The best, really. As George W. Bush once noted, he is our generation's Winston Churchill. Of all the people in the world, our shifty, dead-eyed Ukrainian friend in the tracksuit is uniquely incapable of blowing up a dam. He's literally a living saint, a man in whom there is no sin. That's why Lindsey Graham is so attracted to him. They're just two good people hanging out together.
I think that's a thing that could never have happened on,
Yes.
a cable news network, somebody that had to worry about advertisers, that kind of thing.
Well, and think of how attractive it is to viewers to be able to watch something that they know is uncensored, and short of that, not even massaged to not offend anybody. And this is the future. The future is Twitter and anyone else who can compete with them. Because I use the example of a guy like Don Lemon. As much as we make fun of him, let's say the former CNN anchor, host, whatever. Let's say he has a following, people that like him. Well, he could go to Elon Musk and make a deal to put on his own show.
Musk himself, Tim, has said, after Tucker posted his show, he actually tweeted at Rachel Maddow and one of the other, some other progressive-y type that said, you basically it would be great to see your shows on here too. Everybody should have a show. Yeah.
Yeah, the water is good. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, I'm sure I think I would even watch Rachel Maddow a couple times just to see.
Well, the thing is,
she's like on the unplugged.
She doesn't want, the difference is that her views aren't censored. She has a comfortable place at MSNBC. I don't think she has to struggle with her producers to get you can imagine Tucker arguing with folks like, oh, we can't say that. Or,
that's what we think, but I'm not sure
true.
That's true.
It's a total prejudice.
For example, but look at MSNBC.
Or presumption, rather, let's say.
I mean, look, Fox had its issues with trying to cover Trump objectively numerous times, but particularly after the election. Well, MSNBC has the challenge of trying to make Biden look palatable. And the way they do that is by omission, not commission. I doubt they did more than a quick glance at his faceplant at the Air Force Academy, for example. Okay, whereas Fox was probably running it on a loop, right?
Yes.
So I think both of them have their corporate pressures. It's just a matter of how severe it is. But it'd be good to compare. Let's say Rachel Maddow left MSNBC and then did her own show on Twitter.
What are we seeing there?
We could do a before and after to see
would
how
she
much
abandon her
really
support for the war. The other thing that she's had, even Bill O'Reilly, who I was not, well, whatever. Fox News had a reputation of putting on, or maybe they still do, putting on people that disagree from the other side, right? So they'll have a challenging person who says that the host's opinion is wrong, whatever that opinion may be on a host, on a number of issues. But I once said to a person who I'm related to, who sometimes listens to the podcast, does it trouble you that Rachel Maddow never has anyone on the show ever who profoundly disagrees with her on a single issue? And her reply was, no, that doesn't matter. So anyway, I think that's why I have lesser regard for Ms. Maddow and her presentation.
I think that what Rachel Maddow and most of them in MSNBC, who they're reaching across the aisle, is getting like Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney.
That's so
Republican
funny,
Liz
We've got
Cheney.
Liz Cheney, yeah.
That's their idea of it. So it's really better that they used to do this too. And pro-life, pro-choice, pro- and anti-abortion rights, which is the proper sort of objective term for it. They would bring on, some college professor, some wizened college professor to take the pro-choice point of view, and then they'd bring on some guy practically drooling out of the side of his
This guy's got an 8th grade education, but a lot of church, and he's going to tell us why the Constitution forbids it. Yeah, exactly.
Right. And let's get the most uncivilized looking person they can find to make it, to make it clear.
Let's go ahead and move along to focus on some other challengers for the nomination, and this time on the Democrat side. I have been promising an RFK segment, Tim, to the listeners, and I don't have one today. And the reason why is because I went this morning to listen to the Twitter Spaces discussion between Elon Musk and RFK Jr., and was surprised to learn that it was over 2 hours. So I have to really budget a lot of time to kind of get in there and clip it and see what he said. So we don't have that, but we do have two other challengers for the Democrat nomination, Tim. We've got a serious contender and perhaps a likely, if things go bad for Biden. And then we've got another one who certainly will not be president of the United States, but I think is fun, and there's some good clip there. So I will let you decide, Tim, which way we take the conversation at this turn. Shall we go with the...
Well, it depends on whether once he loses the nomination, the President Biden is willing to endorse Marianne Williamson, in her fight against Donald Trump.
It's not Marianne Williamson.
Oh,
instead of
not.
that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Instead of that,
well, that's who you were talking about.
No, it is Brother Cornell West, Tim.
Yes.
But
he's not a Democrat. That's way too far to the right.
The People's Party, Tim, is that?
There it is, the People's Party.
He's the People's Party.
It's perfect.
He's the People's Party candidate, and
Brother Cornell.
He's been married 4+ times. He is a Harvard professor.
4+? What does 4+ mean?
Well, he's been married at least 4 times. That we have records on those.
So he is
the first.
I know what you did. You deliberately didn't look up exactly how many times, so you could say more than 4.
At least.
So that means it could be 5 or 10 or 15. That's very well
which is kind of interesting for a Harvard, for a professor who has a master's or a doctorate in divinity. That's sort of how he made his way. He's the first African-American graduate of the Princeton University doctorate in political science, the first one to be awarded that. And I think he is a kind of race hustler, I think is probably fair to say. He's a
race hustler with a PhD.
Right. And he calls everybody.
He's Al Sharpton with a serious education.
Let's just listen. You'll get a good sense of it just with a brief listen. This is how he is, and he's entertaining to listen to. Oh, and the other thing that I think about Cornell West is he does have a enthusiasm and goodwill in his speech that I think may carry him a lot further in the polls than somebody with his mindset otherwise would. Let's give the man a listen.
in these bleak times, I have decided.
By the way, better music than any other candidate introduction, I think.
And he's
for Brother
also,
West.
I mean, he provides more visual excitement.
Oh, yes.
Because there's so much going on with
Absolutely.
his
He
hair
always
and
wears
his
a
beard
scarf,
and-
by the way, almost like he's got some
True.
disease that requires it. He doesn't, though. It's just like a personal affect.
To run for truth and justice, which takes the form of running for president of the United States as a candidate for the People's Party. I
Please go to the
quest for
dentist.
truth.
Sorry?
Please go to the dentist.
Wow.
Cornell.
Listen, that's his look. He's got that gap tooth smile.
I enter into quest for justice. And the presidency is just one vehicle to pursue that truth and justice, what I've been trying to do all of my life. I come
That's it?
from a tradition.
No,
I
it's-
care
Oh, okay.
about you.
It's actually going to get really
I
interesting. in a
care
second.
about the quality of your life. I care about whether you have access to a job with a living wage, decent housing, women having control over their bodies, health care for all, de-escalating the destruction of the planet, the destruction of American democracy. Democracy creates disruption. It creates an eruption. It creates an interruption. Wide from below, the energies of
That's
everyday
beautiful.
people is manifest.
That's beautiful.
And
gotta
I
say.
know
You're going to get a lot of
there
rhyming
are
from
precious
these
people
candidates.
in your life who
If
you
the glove
care.
don't fit, you must acquit.
That's why it's important for you to be involved, important for you to participate. I'm not talking about hating anybody. We're talking about loving. We're talking about affirming. We're talking about empowering those who have been pushed to the margins, because neither political party wants to tell the truth about Wall Street, about Ukraine,
Now, on this, we
about the
can agree.
Pentagon, about big tech. Neo-fascists like Brother Trump or milquetoast neoliberals like Brother Biden. Wow, I'm so happy to make a world-shaking decision. You know what I mean? Well, I know gangsters when I see them. And gangster's not a subjective expression. It's an objective condition. Do we have...
All right. Now, here's what I thought is super
He
interesting
is
about
very
that.
entertaining. I have to say that.
If you look at those two clips that for those just listening and not watching, Cornell West provided two sort of clips there at the end of the part I just played, and one of them is from Bill Maher's show, and the other one is from Joe Rogan's show.
Right.
Now, those are two people who have avowed themselves to be liberal Democrats for free speech and rebuked the kind of woke cancel culture and have been embraced by, the sort of conservatarians, probably Rogan more so than Maher, but still some of Maher for his robust support of free speech. Anyway, I just thought that was kind of interesting. That's who, Cornell West could have picked an MSNBC clip he's been on there a ton. He could have picked him with Obama to elevate his, bona fides. But no, he picked Rogan and he picked Maher. Curious choices, I think.
I mean, the level of Cornell West's sophistry is really almost unparalleled. I mean,
he has no peer.
He really doesn't. He can talk his way out of anything and make the other person who's obviously right appear that they're wrong. I mean, that he's very good at doing what he does. Let's put it this way. Other than the teeth, and which is, I can't understand why in the 2023 he can't fix a condition. I mean, his teeth look like
God made him perfect the way he is. He doesn't need.
Oh, Scott, that's so moving.
Thank you.
I'm verklempt, Scott, from that. Yeah.
All right, I shut you down entirely. You lost your train of thought on the dental.
You were choked up too.
The orthodontia humor. All right, we're going to check in. We're going to check in with candidate Dr. West, Brother West, as we're going to refer to him exclusively on this podcast as we go forward. But let's turn our attention to Gavin Newsom, who. It's a very interesting thing. He's governor of California. He seems to be doing everything he can to position himself to be a candidate for president while also saying that he supports President
Fully
Biden's
supports
reelection.
the sitting president, right?
Yeah.
Well, look, I think, on the Democratic side, I mean, those people have eyes too. They can see Biden becoming more and more sort of decrepit as time goes by. And we've still got 17 months till the election. And I mean, they've got to think it's an active possibility that he will reverse course and be convinced not to run again. I have no idea whether that's a real possibility or not. But I do have an idea that that's something that obviously should be considered, given how weak and unpopular Joe Biden is. So Newsom's doing the smart thing.
Did you read,
positioning
Tim?
himself, though he could jump in very quickly if necessary.
And did you read in the pages of LibertyNation.com, the sponsor of today's podcast, and the people's source for news and analysis in a conservatarian style, 24/7, 365? Jim Fite's coverage of the Gavin Newsom 28th Amendment proposal by any chance?
I have not.
Oh, well, let me elucidate. Gavin Newsom has proposed a constitutional amendment, or so says the announcement. Let's listen to the prepackaged announcement from Governor Newsom himself.
Every time it's the same. They tell us we can't stop these massacres. They tell us we have to stand by and watch tragedy after tragedy unfold in our communities. They say we can't stop domestic terrorism without violating the Second Amendment. And the thoughts and prayers are the best we can do. I'm here to say that's a lie. In this country, we do have the power to change things, to reclaim our freedom from fear. Our ability to make a more perfect union is literally written into the Constitution. So today, I'm proposing the 28th Amendment to the United States Constitution to do just that.
Now, I'm stopping the production just to say one thing. For anybody who's not watching, this is exactly a campaign commercial. This is a produced.
It is.
They got the piano. They got the soft music. He's got, beautifully lit. The angles are just right. This is exactly a presidential campaign.
I think,
commercial.
what strikes me immediately, that there's also a subliminal message here. 28, 2028.
I like it.
He's the
28th
man
Amendment.
2028.
Permanently enshrines 4 additions to the laws of our land. It raises the minimum age to purchase a firearm from 18 to 21. Because if you can't buy a beer, you shouldn't be able to buy a gun. It mandates universal background checks to prevent truly dangerous people from purchasing a gun that can be used in a crime. It institutes reasonable waiting periods for all gun
Just
purchases.
reasonable ones, Tim.
And it
Reasonable,
bans
not
civilians from
That's
buying
like
assault
the
rifles.
rich paying
Those
their
weapons are
fair share.
Right. All right.
Define it, please.
The most important one, though, is the last, Tim.
reasonable waiting periods
Yeah,
for
right.
all gun purchases. And it bans civilians from buying assault rifles. Those weapons of war our founding fathers never foresaw.
Never foresaw.
This will guarantee states as well the
geez, I
ability
never
to
thought of
enact
that.
common sense gun safety laws while leaving the Second Amendment intact and respecting America's gun owning tradition. The 28th locks in the common sense constitutional protections that Democrats, Republicans, independents, and gun owners overwhelmingly support. And it ensures NRA-owned politicians can never strip those protections away. This fight won't be easy, and it certainly won't be fast. Convening a constitutional convention requires 2/3 of the states to call for this. California will be the first.
All right, I left it to that end though, because the way they want to do it, the way every single amendment that has been passed has passed is there's been a law passed in Congress. It's gone through the Congress, then went to the states, a proposed amendment, and certified by our various state legislatures, 2/3 of which required for the amendment to pass. The other way to get it done, according to the Constitution, is convening a constitutional convention.
Right.
And basically, generally speaking, the left has been averse to doing that when it's been proposed mainly by conservatives because they're afraid of what could come out of it. Because you can't, when you pass a proposed amendment through the Congress and then it's dispersed to the states, they all know what they're voting on, the specific language of the amendment that has been passed. But the convention, it just opens up, for anything. What could come out of there? An entirely new constitution, perhaps. So that's one thing. But the second thing that's just hilarious is that he's like, oh, it doesn't touch our, current Second Amendment. No, it doesn't. It leaves the Second Amendment intact and then produces a new amendment, which
that
right.
It
that will
doesn't
have to be
negate
obeyed.
the
Yeah,
second,
exactly.
but
Exactly.
That's a presidential campaign commercial. I mean, there's no question
That's
about
why,
it. So I think it's his way of demonstrating that he's ready to jump in on a moment's notice if he's called on. Now, here's the formulation with this, Scott. It could be that the powers that be in the Democratic Party are not discouraging this because think about it. Suppose Biden becomes incapacitated in one way or another between now and Election Day 2024, that's 17 months. If you're high Democratic Party officials, do you want Kamala Harris to be the face of the Democratic Party running in 2028?
No.
I mean, they would keep him propped up like they did Woodrow Wilson at the end of his time.
She's really the worst pick in the world. Like, she does nothing. She doesn't bring in the money. She doesn't bring in support from key areas. She doesn't rock on getting it done in terms of like policy or governing.
She's not
like,
even
there's
that
nothing
very,
there.
She's not even very popular in the Black community, to be honest with you. I mean,
that's what I'm saying. She doesn't give support from key constituencies.
Right.
No, she's
right. So that's the problem that the Democrats have is they're stuck between the rock of Biden and the hard place of the election with Kamala
You ought to
Harris.
keep that for an article title, buddy, right there. That's a good one. Between the rock of, say it again.
Let's see, the rock of Biden and the hard place of Harris.
Yeah,
I guess that's how we could put it. But they're not in a position. I think, Republicans, for example, if Trump had been impeached and convicted in a trial in the Senate,
and removed, right?
Most Republicans felt like, well, Mike Pence isn't the most attractive person to us, but he's very solid. He's not.
I guess sit there for a year and not ruin everything,
Right.
Sure. Yeah.
The Democrats certainly can't feel that about Kamala Harris, so they may. I mean, this is deep conspiracy, and but it's reasoned conspiracy theory that they have him sort of on the ready in case, and then he would run as
well, he's making the announcement. I agree with you that he's ready. By the way, the hilarious thing, now I don't know how many hours were spent in terms of the video shoot for this commercial. Knowing what I do about video production, you'd have to say it was a few hours though of the governor's time. Not to mention the discussion of the script, the angles, and how it would be presented, and the music beds, and all that other stuff. Right? We're talking about a significant outlay in time and attention. But it appears that none of them have spent the time and attention to actually write this proposed amendment, by the way. The text of it doesn't exist. It's vaporware. It's just his saying.
Well, but he gives us a basic idea. We can vote on amending the Constitution
so hilarious because
just based on some talking points.
Yeah.
Sure.
What it does is just put just a reasonable waiting period. Like, does it say that? Does it? Because all you're doing then is making a law that says nothing. But if there's an actual number of days, weeks, or months, why not just say the days, weeks, or months? It's all vaporware. It's all just it's the worst. I will say this. The one thing. Let me pay the governor a compliment. The one thing that I will say is that Second Amendment advocates and guns rights advocates have been saying for generations now, hey, you lefties, you want to ban guns, you progressives, you want to take the guns out of my hands, fine, go pass a constitutional amendment, because the Second Amendment means what it says. It guarantees us our right. So at least, I don't like the lie that it won't disturb the Second Amendment, but at least they're having, Tim, I think, a good move, which is, this should be a debate that the people have. What do we want to be? Do we want to be an armed populace or not? And let our basic laws reflect that. And I think that's a good fight to have. Although, of course, the other lie is that somehow the second or the assault weapons are some kind of extra type of weapon that don't belong in civilian hands, when in fact that's exactly where AR-15s
Well, I
belong.
agree. As sunlight being the best disinfectant, as they say, it's better to come out with exactly what you want to do with the 28th Amendment than to simply illegally subvert the Second Amendment, so that we can at least have, I mean, we can't seem to debate about anything else, the left and right.
Well, wait a second. Tim, there's plenty of trans access issues that we can discuss when we're not arguing about guns, right?
Never, Scott.
All right,
never.
Let's finish up here with a little talk about the Supreme Court, who did not release any of the blockbuster cases that I was waiting on. I know, Tim. They will always disappoint you. They did send down a case in Allen v. Milligan, though, which is the Voting Rights Act out of Alabama, I think. They redrew their lines after the 2020 census, and instead of using racist legislators' preferences about who would vote where, or woke progressives or other things, they used a computer, and they said, we'll have a computer draw these lines with, and the programming will be open, and we can see that it's not, race-based programming. It doesn't take race into account at all, and they'll draw the congressional lines, which it did, and then it produced a result which did not favor the maximum potential for African Americans to be elected. So I know you know this, but just for people listening who may not know, if you want to, if you've got to, so there's 7 congressional districts in Alabama. If you want to make sure that blacks only can vote for one black person, you cram all the blacks into one district, and then it's like 99.9% blacks, and they're going to vote for one black guy, but all the rest of the votes in the other districts will be devoid of black participation and presumably produce white candidates, right? That's sort of the thing. Well, the computer model, because of the way that the population is dispersed, just happened to produce such a result. Again, not a racist, outcome, or rather, wasn't a race-based decision, but it had.
You're obviously not aware of the fact that several computers have credibly been charged with racial bias, Scott.
The Supreme Court says, even though you did this race-neutral computer, that doesn't matter. That the Voting Rights Act requires you, Tim, to be race conscious in all these things. You can't draw race neutral lines if you're in the South and you have have any history of previously discriminating.
And it's not just Alabama. It's Virginia, for example, which is now more of a northern state.
If it's a state that has a past discrimination against freed slaves, basically in voting, they have to do race conscious, which I thought was a surprising take for me. Justice Thomas wrote a lengthy dissent from the court's opinion, which, by the way, was Breyer and Kavanaugh matching with the liberals to overturn conservative objection to it. And anyway, Thomas says that it's true under our direction, federal courts have engaged in methodically carving the country into racially designated electoral districts for decades now, but that fact should inspire us to repentance, not resignation. So that was his...
Yeah, that's a very powerful statement because, this is just one form of a broader political phenomenon known as gerrymandering, right? Where you carve up districts to the political benefit of one party or another, where you get these weird districts with a tiny little sliver.
One highway,
one highway.
Down to the black neighborhood and back. Yeah. That's what
that's classic gerrymandering,
and that preposterous type of map drawing is what the Chief Justice says is required. Now, I think Justice Thomas. It's tough to hear a beatdown when you're talking about race from the black guy, on the court, which is why I think there's been so many attacks on him, from the progressive side lately because of this affirmative action ruling. That I think is coming, and I think it's going to be Thomas, and I think he's going to strike it down. And we have a clip for one of those attacks to play in a minute. But before we do, this came out last week, I think it was, and I forgot to play it, but I wanted to put it out there because it's what the Tim, the most important voices on the left communications wise, what they have to say about Tim Scott and Clarence Thomas and their authenticity as black men. Let's listen to Dr. Joy Behar from The View.
And he's one of these guys who, he's like Clarence Thomas, black Republican who believes in pulling yourself by your bootstraps, rather than, to me, understanding the systemic racism that African Americans face in this country and other minorities. He doesn't get it, neither does Clarence.
Right.
And that's why they're Republicans.
Yeah. I know.
And these black fellows just don't understand how it is, to be black in America.
Does she realize? Does she have any awareness of how stupid she appears to be? Some white Upper West Side Jewish liberal trying to, what does she do? Trying to lecture these high-ranking black officials, a Supreme Court justice and a United States senator, that they don't realize, like we white Upper West Side, Chablis and Bree, far-left liberals understand what it's like to grow up black in this country.
If you bring Chablis and Bree into it, Tim, you're going to get me to maybe switch sides over there because, who knows?
It is limousine liberals.
It's so preposterous, like with a straight face. And the co-hosts don't greet that with peals of laughter, but yes, indeed, they these men. Well,
very serious.
Dick Durbin, right? Another
Dr.
week.
Behar, you've pinpointed the problem.
Dick Durbin attacked Clarence Thomas as well this week, and I thought it bore remarking upon because he is the Senate Judiciary Committee chairman, and commenting about the justice and the continued discussion about Harlan Crow, the justice's billionaire friend.
The human smoking gun.
While we are focused on the ethical conduct of all the justices, the revelations about hundreds of thousands of dollars in undisclosed gifts that Justice Clarence Thomas has received over the past 2 decades present the clearest example of the appearance of misconduct that we must address through legislation.
The reason why I wanted to play that clip is because of him talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars of gifts. And that only counts if you use his peculiar method of accounting. And as I wrote for the sponsor of today's podcast, in LibertyNation.com, even a Federal Society member might blanch at a Supreme Court justice for getting hundreds of thousands of dollars of worth of gifts from some private person. And no problem here. Thomas didn't. It's a big, giant lie. And his accounting goes like this. So if you're invited to Mar-a-Lago for the weekend, what's the value of that invitation? Well, if you're Dick Durbin, the value is you go price rental of a 7+ acre estate in Palm Beach with 58 bedrooms, 33 bathrooms, 12 fireplaces, 5 tennis courts, and a 20,000 square foot ballroom for the same number of days. And then you apply that and you say that's the value. Right. And so that would be a couple $100,000 probably a night. And so you've got a, $500,000 or $1 million vacation or better. Meanwhile, you were in the spare bedroom and, you didn't even get a drink because
no room service. It's probably not even room service. Which, as you said, is proof that God loves us, right?
It's like this whole idea that this luxury vacation. The guy's a billionaire and his house is really nice and his yacht is really nice. And Clarence Thomas didn't rent that yacht. He doesn't own it. He doesn't control where it goes or what happens on there. He's just a guest. And I just thought it was indicative of Durbin is positioning himself as this honest, just out of concern for the court and the nation, and it's all a bunch of BS played for ideological and partisan gain. And I just,
I guess there's one simple conclusion to be reached from it that can be summed up in 3 words: friendship is unconstitutional.
When you're Clarence Thomas, it is if it benefits the left. All right, that's it for today. Tim, I'm going to leave you to your weekend privileges. Thank you so much for joining me, and we'll see you next week.
Okay, look forward to it. The
Bye-bye.
drama continues.
The drama continues. Thank you.
Thanks.
We are the uprising.
Entertaining, informative, and just plain fun. Watch Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5. Produced by conservatives for conservatives. C5's The Left Free Zone. Hosted by Liberty Nation's Lisa K. Donner. Joined by a raucous, irreverent panel of authors. Deconstructing leftist narratives. Debating the hot topics. And remembering to laugh. Join the official conservative safe space.
You only did that to piss Jeff off.
Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5.
That's it for this edition of The Uprising. Remember to hit Liberty Nation News for original articles, LN Radio, and our signature television program, The Conservative 5. Just go to libertynation.com on your browser or hit Rumble, YouTube, or check out our Liberty Nation News Roku channel. I'm Scott Cosenza. Thanks for joining The Uprising. This program is a production of libertynation.com, where truth is making a comeback.